this subject has been gathering attention globally. While we are talking about ecological transformation, we are going to be talking about how can culture and arts can take role and help with this transformation. And here we have people who are evaluating this subject from different parts, both as a researcher and both as an artist. And within the hour, we are also going to talk about the role of arts and culture and where we'll be going. I would like to introduce myself at first, and then our panelists will introduce themselves. I am Derin Altan. I am uh, I'm the host of an podcast and program with my friend Utku Güven about the climate crisis and ecological transformations. We have 36 episodes, and we are taking a look at a climate crisis from a lot of different perspectives, and culture and arts is one of the perspectives we would like to take a look at. So we will be talking with our panelists about these subjects. I am going to ask a couple of questions. We will try to have this panel in a more conversational manner. If you have questions, you can also write them to us. I will try to follow them as well. Let's start with you, Ms. Güneş, quickly. You are a member of the strategy board in the Buğday Association, but of course you have many hats and many roles, and of course in your life, personally, you are interested in ecological transformation. When we take a look at the subject of this panel, we are assuming it is necessary to have an ecological transformation. Let's start to question that and try to understand the reasons why we are assuming this. Currently, when we take a look at the world in this year, do you think that it is necessary to have an ecological transformation? You are very experienced in natural preservation, and I think you have about 10 to 15 years of experience with nature, and I think I would like to also hear about your personal experiences, and is the nature giving us a signal for ecological transformation? Can we hear your ideas? Thank you very much. Hello everybody. Of course, this question, I can only answer this question with my own personal experience. It's not going to be an answer, but we are in a sense, we are searching for it. And I have been for about almost 30 years. I have studied biology and I have worked for nature preservation. And I've constantly seen the last 30 years in the perspective of nature. And unfortunately, I have seen the destruction of nature in the Anatolia, and I'm one of the people who have seen that destruction. Of course, we didn't used to have such digital capabilities back then, and we couldn't hear every news immediately, and we had a very low number of people who were on the field, and people who were on the field were only working in an academic sense. We had taken a look at the nature as an NGO, and we are following the forests and the birds and the species, and every time we visit an area, we are realizing they are getting damaged constantly. And when you are the observer of that, you are responsible with this knowledge, and that's why we started to start the struggle to fight with the destruction of nature as an NGO. And of course, personally for myself, when I see that when you are going after a bird or when you are walking in a forest and when you constantly do these things, you realize that the birds and the forests are not caring about us, and you, as people, we think that the whole world is ours, but we are actually a small part of the world. At that point, I had an enlightenment. I think I lived my life as a nihilist. I had some existential crisis during that time, but it didn't take long for me to recover from that. But it only, in the end, it only made me change my perspective, and I realized that this problem is not about the nature; it's about people. Because what we call nature is a search for balance. It is not entirely balanced at any point, but it is surviving while pursuing balance. This is how it is defined. And actually, the garden doesn't have any problems. The garden, this nature, will bring balance to itself. But unfortunately, when we take a look at the species of humanity, biologically and culturally, I also, when you look at the other species and when you take a look at the nature, we see a species and that is burdened by the laws of nature and physics as well. We are not above it, but of course, within our minds, with our brains, which are also a result of evolution as well, we have an imaginary world in our hands, and our relationship with wild nature has unfortunate and serious problems. And if we are part of the nature, what we are living is the results of the nature as well. But when you take a look at it, about 70-80% of the world is using about 2 to 3% of the surface of the world in the cities. As a species, we are trying to be alone. We are trying to live away from biodiversity. We are trying to make our own rules and we want to create our own world. And the civilization that we see is not in line with nature, but it is still within the rules of the nature. So we are going against the flow and the current. Our way of life is going against the current. To be able to make it possible, we are constantly using energy to keep a food from rotting. We are using energy because there is entropy, and entropy, to fight with entropy, you have to use energy. Because our source of energy is carbon based, and just because we are removing these materials from underground and burning them. Of course, this is a simple view. This is not the only reason, but I think it seems like we are at the end of the line. So, for the question of ecological transformation, what I'm going to say is the transformation that we are talking about in the ecological transformation is a transformation of humans, because we have to go towards a more ecological system. This is transformation of paradigms is what we are saying, and it has to be done wholeheartedly and entirely. This is not just a change. Changing a part only works in a machine. A piece of it will break and you will put a new one. But currently, we cannot fix the machine. We have to entirely change it. All the systems of humanity, production, healthcare, the society, we have to question our way of life, and this can only happen by transforming all of them, and this is definitely about humanity. And nature can only inspire us because it is moving on, and yes, we have hurt it in a big way, but it will fix itself definitely and surely, and it is the base rule of nature. It will survive. Yes, while we are talking about change and transformation, I thought about uh, in the translation of Kafka's Metamorphosis. I think they use that word from change to transformation in the first time with the first translation. They used the word change, but then after the second at the second translation they had used transformation. So you have talked about a mental transformation, and when we take a look at our subject, uh, with Istanbul Culture and Art Association, they have an report and documentation, and I would like to talk to Miss Hande about the report. They have talked about this report in the Jazz Festival, and as somebody who is focusing on these kinds of reports, I thought a lot about what you have been through while preparing that document, and I know you have given a lot of effort for this. So, can you quickly talk about your experiences while developing that report? As always, I forget about the microphone. Of course, thank you very much for your question. I think we have started the panel with a great question. The difference between change and transformation is very important because when we take a look at the last 50 years, we realize there are changes towards a more sustainable life, but we have not experienced a transformation. That's why we are in the middle of an ecological crisis, especially in recent times. We are experiencing the harsh truths of the climate crisis, and if we were to only take a look at our local areas in the last summer with the forest fires and floods, you can realize how bad the situation is. Also, the mucilage problem in the Marmara Sea, we can see that we are definitely in an ecological crisis, and the question for us in our ninth report that has been made by the Istanbul Culture and Art Association is the question we have arrived is, why are we not able to achieve transformation? There are a lot of research, there are a lot of actors working on this subject, a lot of research is being done, a lot of steps are being taken, we have serious data, and we have policies. There are international agreements. As you know, the Paris Agreement is one of them. They will have a conference in the November 26th. But we still cannot talk about and see an ecological transformation. This is a big crisis, and there are a lot of sides to it. So there's a multidimensional crisis, and Güneş'in talked very well about that. We have to have an entirely inclusive and entirely effective transformation. And I've been working on the ecological crisis for a lot of years. And from the perspective of government officials and politicians, when I take a look at it, I have been taking a look at it from the politician's point of view. In the last document, we focused on the artist's point of view. And for this report, it was, of course, inspiring to work on it, because we have experienced the pandemic after we started working on the report, but we had a digital research, but of course it has lowered the ecological impact of the research because we use the digital space to be able to do that. It is giving us a framework with a great capacity, and we are discussing, for example, limits of the planet, and we are taking a look at specific questions. Why are these limits are important? Or what does it mean to be sustainable? And we are taking a look at the history of these as well. And the core question is this: how can we achieve a whole transformation, and all the stakeholders, what kind of a role can every organization and artist can take? And we see that they have two main parts, and one of them is the actors of culture and art. What can they do to lower their ecological footprint? And we have to first measure the ecological footprint of the artist, and then we can do various kinds of improvements, like improving the energy sources, using sustainable energy sources, lowering the energy consumption, and managing the trash, lowering the amount of consumption and trash, or if it's possible, lowering to zero, trying to not create any trash and trying to reuse anything and everything. And for the events on spaces and buildings, having them more in line, more applicable to the nature, lowering the carbon footprint. And some of them are technical changes, some of them are not, and these are the things that we can focus on as the actors of art and culture. Of course, a second part is maybe more important for transformation, is that how can the actors of culture and art can use their creative power to help, and how can they create a new story for the world. And of course, creating and sharing this new story for the world is a responsibility of the artist, because it is very important for us to be focusing on that. We need a new apprehension. We have a warped relationship with nature. To be able to reinstate it properly, we have to take a new perspective, and that is the transformation we are talking about, beyond limited changes towards sustainability. And the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, is a big crisis, and they have a lot of different dimensions, and it might not be possible to understand it immediately, but the artists have a very big role here to start people and inspire people. We have a lot of different examples that we have seen about these things, and maybe in the future we can talk about this. And talking about new stories is very important for us. Of course, we have to develop new practices as artists in within these changes. When you realize the different dimensions of ecological crises, you can only then have transformations. And the Marmara Municipalities Union has the slogan to rethink, and it is very in line with what we have to do. One of our findings was that local governments can also have a supportive role for artists and works about climate crisis, and this is very valuable because both for culture and arts, creating specific policies and political, maybe it is maybe a bit too political this part, but well, people are talking about their own stories. They can get support from these organizations. I would like to finish right here, then we will continue afterwards. Thank you very much. Actually, I wanna add at some points and join in, but we only have 1 hour. We can't speak for 10 hours as well, but I just wanna add that you talked about multidimensionality, but I am actually a lawyer by training, and Utku is also a lawyer. But we are very curious, and we started to read the climate science books. And for the hyperobjects term from Timothy Morton's term, he's working on philosophy of climate change, and it is defining very well in that manner. And we are constantly referencing the actors of culture and art, and of course we will be returning to Miss Yasenim for that as well. And roles of cultures and art actors are I am very excited when I'm asking questions because I am a lawman. Maybe we'll have different perspectives, and I am afraid of asking a wrong question, but I would like to first ask, can you talk about what you have generated both physically and mentally? Maybe if you would like to talk about what you have been doing, we will start with that, then I will ask another question. Thank you very much, everybody. I would like to start with I am not in I'm not an expert on law either, so we are mutual in that meaning. I've listened to the speeches with utmost attention, and it was quite quick, and with the comfort of being an artist, I think I would like to give an answer with some with the examples of some of my works. I think you can see it as the full screen. In 2011, when I was back from holiday, I have seen this in my kitchen, and of course, with the reflex of an artist, I just took a couple of pictures with my phone or a camera. I don't know. It was very much a recording of surprise, and some years later, in the summer of 2016, I was preparing for an expo that I was doing, and with this soul I have returned to the archives, and I wanted to take a look at this image again, and of course this is a low resolution image. This is not taken to be produced and printed. And also remembering this instance, I wanted to think about recreating this, and I started to do some little experiments at home. And my friend, who is very familiar with the land, he talked about it can be a marginic or maybe melon seed. And also because that kitchen had low light levels, he is saying that in the entire effort of the plant was going on getting height to be able to reach light. So at that point, within the city, in our balconies and in our city spaces, they don't have much possibility to see the sky. And of course, during the pandemic, I have started to plant and try to have similar plants living in balconies and stuff. And the workshop of balcony gardening had, I remembered I had said that you shouldn't give it stress to these things. For example, if they are getting up, you shouldn't just move them to a more to a place with more light, because it will be giving them stress. So I wanted to use that, and the name of the work is the stress of hope or light. This is the next image. During the pandemic, I think I thought the most about inequality. Craig Farrell, I think, is an academician. This is created by him, and this is about equality and equity. A lot of people might have seen it on the internet, and as there are a lot of different versions of this image. And in the recent times, Istanbul has gained another place in 9 of October, and this is it is called Postane, and it's a great example. And this place has invited me to work with them, and this work has gotten its inspiration from this image. I think I have to go back to show you that, and there it is. I didn't have the closer picture, but you can I can read what is written on the pots right now. And the name of the work is justice always equal? And when we think about the resources, we think them to be infinite. Of course, giving everybody as much as they need is a different understanding, because what is art doing here? The art is trying to visualize the discussion and share the ideas and increase the collaboration of thoughts. How's my time? I wanted to ask Yasemin, in this you talked about you don't know much about law, but of course Utku, my friend, is working on human rights law, and daily we are constantly talking about how we can change and improve equality and human rights. But this is a great image for me, and Ms. Hande has also referenced her report for equality and the role of artists on that. Also, as in a wider spec, actors in the field of culture and arts, do they have a role? And lately, the artists have been more active on this manner. I think maybe this is only maybe my point of view, but I think actors of cultures and art are maybe working more in this manner. First of all, I want to remember what Güneş said, and she said that we are all taking care of this area. And to be honest, we should not divide the professions in this world, and we shouldn't forget what we have been through last summer. And I think this is a common issue. So I don't think artists have a specific special responsibility. And I think artists are not the mirrors of society. And in the ways that you can become an artist in a country where all the arts classes and music classes are unfortunately without teachers. So this could be, of course, thought about it, and every issue that is requiring some emergency is always part of art. And how can we call the ideas like getting smaller or green developments, and we have a lot of different issues, how we can use the arts in that manner. And art also helps visualize these issues, and with that it can maybe mediate the discussion and creating some emotional bridges between people. And that is the power of art. And as an artist, this is including myself as well. When I go to an exhibition, when I go to a museum, the feelings created in me, the ideas created in me is very valuable. And I think this is the case for all of the productions, not just for visual arts, in cinema, in literature, everything.
That would be my answer to your question. Thank you very much, Ms. Yasemin. In our speeches, we mentioned disconnection from the nature, and our relationship with the nature is going a bit weird. We're looking into the nature through the lens of consumption, but this also involves a false pride. 120,000 acres of area were burnt down, and we're just looking into the pine trees. And we believe, like people believe, that we can have forestation in this place just with those pine trees. Somebody asked me, we went to the moon. How can we fail in forestation? And I said, well, landing on the moon is a matter of engineering. So in nature, there's a lot of factors that you cannot really control. In the space, maybe you're just sending a machine into the space. And in cultural terms, this is basically indicating a deterioration in our relations with the nature. Ms. Güneş'in, I'd like to ask you this, how come we came to that point? This deterioration took place like right under my observation. There are individual examples to that. For example, you are an exemplary person on that. You can be taken as an example based on your observations. Can what you're doing turn into a global example? Return to nature. Can it turn into a mass movement? Well, I jumped from sentence to sentence in my own mind. We're being disconnected from the nature. Yes, I do agree with that. But I'm also considering that our relations with the nature is not disconnected. We think it is disconnected, but this connection actually is uh, within ourselves. The arrogance that you mentioned, it's just a very hollow arrogance. We cannot even own up that arrogance because such an arrogance could actually take place. Let me just give you a positive arrogance. Let me just brief it as a human being. The those forests have been there for about 30 million years, and this is basically a natural behavior of that ecosystem. The reason could be not natural, but burning is natural. So, forestation, the idea of forestation, yes, it has the dimension of arrogance, but if the burnt down place was not made of that kind of trees, uh, maybe forestation could have been possible. If it's not just redwood, for example, we could have done that. Restoratory justice, we use this restoration concept, and we also have a title of restorative agriculture. And this is basically a way out, perhaps, for us, because uh, nature's talent of recovery, maybe if we observe that in its depth and utilize human-made technology through a reinterpretation, we can bury carbon into the soil, and we can give the capability of regeneration to the nature back. Yes, that could be about a some kind of an arrogance, and this has to do with our connection with the very self that represents us. Once we find this, we're gonna go through a real recovery. For that reason, we should take a look into this issue very well. Equality in the work of Yasemin, the issue of fairness, for example, it has been put forward, and as a nature scientist, I don't want to boast about social sciences, but there is a movement that chases equality, but when I look into the nature, I don't see equality. There is an equality in difference in nature. So if there is difference, there is diversity. The equality could only come about through this diversity. It sounds a bit oxymoronic, but we have to look into that. And when we say ecological transformation, well, the question is, what makes this transformation ecological? It's not the content, but it's the context. In our work, once we increase participation and diversity, we are having an ecological movement because we are mimicking the way nature works. We are kind of referring to it. And this ecological crisis, as we've always been told, it's not just in nature, in food chain. It's not just on the in the air or water. What we call crisis is basically pushing us for change. We're we are going through a crisis wherever human exists. The art is going through a crisis. The science is going through a crisis, mythologically and content-wise, issue-wise. We're going through a crisis, and the ongoing crisis that we have is pushing us break the shell. Whatever is limited is valuable, right? So the nature is basically being limited now, and once if we have a lot of nature but limited cities, the cities are going to start attracting our attention. So it is important to understand where we are in terms of the cycle. We are on the becoming extinct side of the cycle. So this is a trend, and this trend of construction destruction, we are on the destruction side. We are a means of destruction, an important means of it, but at the end of every destruction there is a fast construction. So there is a destruction, and the construction is going to come out of that. So we are going through the cycle of destruction. So we are prone to construction. How is that going to come about? Is it going to come about? Well, this ecological transformation, I don't know. That is my answer. But once we reach to a critical threshold, that may happen. It's important that we are even talking about that now. We're allocating time and space to this. So I believe all that is a preparation to that critical transformation. So I'm trying to do everything without asking that very question. Thank you very much, Ms. Güneşin. You mentioned that this crisis is pushing us to break our shell. So the ecological transformation, well, it was covered by Ms. Hande, that she's going to cover the political and sociological dimensions of that. But within that transformation, we have different systemic transformation. Ms. Yasemin mentioned degrowth. We attribute a lot of importance to that issue. We're going to talk about, we talked about degrowth with Fikret Adaman in the second season that we had. In theory, it is all good, but once the systemic changes take place and once there is a lot of systemic injustices within the system, you would find different issues. In Madagascar, for example, there are different discussions are taking place on carbon neutrality. And this, I'd like to ask you about that, Ms. Hande. Within the ecological transformation, we have political and economical transformation. So how can the ecological transformation be triggered with culture and art? Can you expand on that, please? Of course, it is an important question, and it lies at the very heart of the question. Let me try and wrap it up. We mentioned the concept of justice. This lies at the very center of transformation. Once we say the climate justice or environment justice, it is very difficult to own the transformation. What do I mean with that? The climate justice means that the ecological crisis, it deals with the existing economical and political injustices, and the crisis is increasing these injustices actually. And the vulnerable groups are going through very tough times in terms of injustices, and they have far less than enough resources to get out of this crisis. And at the global level, maybe countries could be placed in a context of historic responsibility. For example, Madagascar has no contribution to climate crisis, but it is going through the effects in an intense manner. So there's this matter of justice. So transformation should be holistic. That's what we said at the beginning, and this means that the transformation, it deals with certain approaches. And I was going to say that there are a lot of examples to that. We had this at the heart of cultural and artistic actors, and Yasemin provided a lot of example as an artist. And as an artist, she creates a work that is deeply connected with the justice, or rather lack of it, and focusing on how to provide fairness, for example. Well, in this context, how are we going to deal with the issue of the growth? It is being discussed in economic and political fields. But one of the biggest reasons of that crisis is economic growth being prioritized over everything. The concept of unlimited growth. Well, we started to see that it is less than possible, but that mental transformation is something different. This has been genetically coded as such, and our relation with nature being broken has to do with that, because this relationship is based on dominating the nature. If all that are going to change, it requires a larger cultural transformation, and as pointed out by Dirya Semin, it is the artists and creators of culture and art who are going to make us rethink these issues. These practices are changing. We said justice, we said participation, and as Gunishin said, diversity. Yes, for diversity to take place, we need participation. In the creation of the word, a lot of people and groups could take place. And this is a political problem at the heart, because it has to do with creation of democratic platforms. It has to do with creating the word together, establishing the table together. And all that, the thing that we define overlap, this overlap is on the agenda of culture and art. So new practices are on the rise, and new approaches are coming about. We saw that in the report, and that locality, democratic participation, and rethinking the joint perspective, rethinking the perspective of fairness and justice, for example, it presents this overlap. This is why the transformation is holistic. If it was just about implementing the policies in a top-down manner, this crisis would be solved. But for the transformation, we have to talk about the justice. We have to establish a participatory system, and that involves a lot of issues, including political and economic issues. So about this arrogant perspective that we talked about, let me say something. About the repair, what Gunishin said is very important, but I'm not sure whether it really comes from arrogance. I believe our perspective is dominated by arrogance on nature, but what you said is it involves learning from the nature, and once we learn from the nature, we have to keep that arrogance aside. And one last issue is in this cycle of creation destruction, we are on the destruction side, but for construction to come out of that, I believe as a social scientist we need active intervention, a bottom-up intervention, and for that to take place, a lot of people should embrace the issue and mobilize around that. And the driving force perhaps would come about from the field of culture and art. About this overlap, I was going to give an example. That was an exhibition called Between Two Seas, but I don't have time to present that. You know, another important role that the culture and art field plays is the creation of the dialogue. You know, as scientists, as a natural scientist, as a social scientist, as artists, for example, we gather together to focus on these issues, and we are looking to create a common grounds. Yes, culture and art plays an intermediary role in the creation of a common ground. Listening to you, you know, something popped up on my mind. You know, I was going to ask this to Miss Yasemin. She shared two visuals on which, you know, I would have to write 20 pages to describe. In the remaining time, Miss Yasemin, I'd like to get information on your inner reflections, you know. You're working directly with soil, and there's philosophical dimension to it. You're giving ceramic classes in your workshop to a variety of age groups, and you make them work with soil. So in the remaining 7 minutes, please inform us on that. Thank you very much. Please stop me when necessary, because I also jumped from sentence to sentence. You know, ceramic, you know, being in the same state with soil, well, it expands your space and provides new spaces to you. You know, the justice, is it always equality, for example, that I mentioned that question, right? So ceramic, maybe a bit differently from other disciplines, it is between art and craft. And at that point, arrogance, well, about the arrogance, I have a lot to say, but, you know, respect for labor and, well, that concept makes me commemorate Rifat Usta, but I'd like to put it down as a note that the Department of Ceramic, when there was no established oven, its first student, Saadi Diran, to ovenize his works, he goes to Hasan Usta in Göksu. Rifat Usta is the son of Hasan Usta, so it's not an easy production process. All that visibility he wanted to have his workshop to be coded as a cultural heritage element, as a workshop of ceramic. So he wants that to happen. So we want to think together whether there are ways for that. You know, it's a workshop that has been creating. About relations with the soil, the urban life, we are producing in small scale. But again, I'd like to move on reminding Cappadox here. Cappadox Contemporary Art Festival organized by Fulya Ertemci and Kevser Turat as its curators. Well, it changed my scale as a ceramic artist. Just like the Kyoto in Japan, they established an avanaz on the banks of Kızılırmak. So if the settlement starts on the basis of water and soil, well, we move on in such manner. So in this regard, that procession of the issues and rooting in and considering the ecological transformation, we have issues that come with that, and I'd like to share a visual from that. I'm going to end it with connecting it to today. We saluted ceramic classes as well. Let me share my screen. There were two works of art that I created at Cappadox. The edition that I participated was basically entitled as Exiting the World. And this is a metaphor of the world, and Twins workshop is called. So until the noontime, they work on things like that, and they never buy any raw material. By the way, they take it all from the nature. They mix it together, and I like this earthenware pot workshop directly dealing with the nature. Well, it inspired me a lot. You would all remember, the plastic water containers. This is something that I saw in their workshop. I got excited and I thought it was the replica of what you did. And they said this actually belonged to our grandfather. A cat broke it and we remade it. We replicated it to maintain the form. To maintain the form, well, this is very important because they know that once it is broken, its form would be lost. So they are protecting it through reproduction. It is a wise attitude, and we have a lot to learn from that. And one last thing is in connection with the current day and in connection with the 15th century. About the classes, we have different professional groups. It made me think again. It was more than a class during the pandemic. If you ask me if we could have online ceramic courses, I would laugh at you, but with the pandemic, well, in the first month of the pandemic, we watched the ceiling for a month, and then we started thinking. So my provider facilitated the provision of raw material, and one small thing, of course, it is important that I have been giving that class for a long time. In the film that Ali Kazman shot, he uses a mirror We watched that movie in a class, and dear Neslihan Bashar was with us. Said that she's using Zoom like a mirror. I think my time is up. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, we have limited time. Our time is limited, and we have completed this hour. I'd like to thank all the participants and you. I hope we will meet again and discuss these issues at length. Thank you very much. Thank you for the good question and nice discussion. Thank you.